So again, it's hard to wear a kimono as it is unless you're looking like you're wearing a bathrobe or a costume. So this way you can use the beautiful fabrics and make it into contemporary clothing. So what I wanted to do is utilize the beauty of the fabrics, and just you can't find that nowadays. It's very, very difficult to find the workmanship and just the amount of time that the older pieces have in the fabric, the textiles. So this far away, but again, I was inspired also by the long mandarin coats, a very Asian in feeling, yet contemporary, worn with a slim pant. I generally start my design process by the fabric first, and it inspires me into the different styles.
I started collecting records in high school, and then in college I heard a mixtape by Muro. It was called Hawaiian Breaks. And when I heard that, I recognized some of the songs, but I had no idea that all the songs on that mixtape were all from Hawaii. So this rabbit hole opened up, and I went into this world of music, from local music from the 70s and the 80s. And several years later, I turned it into a record label, this obsession or interest of mine, and these are some of the releases that I've done. This is our sound installation at the YWCA, which Bettina mentioned, and it's on display now, and you can interact with it.
What really struck me was the role of older, smaller, better architectural blocks in building resilient and vibrant urban spaces. And we were very fortunate that the National Trust for Historic Preservation has been doing a lot of research in this area and looking at how our older urban spaces relate to issues of sustainability, resilience, and character. Lots of older, smaller buildings are quietly contributing to robust local economies and distinctive livable communities. And I think too often we think that we can only build our way to sustainability when in fact we can only conserve our way to it. And I think our built environment is an incredibly important part of that. Everything old is new again. Taking this 1929 warehouse and bringing it back to a just lovely example of what is possible. But the real difference, I think, with this is that it will never be a high-rise. And I love Symphony. I think David and his team did a great job with it. But I think Kaka'ako also needs these smaller buildings, and they need to be kept to add that vibrancy and that character and that sense of where we came from and where we're going. And so to have these side by side in the same neighborhood, I think adds some richness and diversity and vibrancy that might otherwise be lacking. So when we start to look at sustainability, looking at the role of rehabilitation, retrofitting, adapting, modifying if necessary, but really using what we already have. Conservation is essentially not throwing stuff away, not wasting. And I think that needs to extend to our built environment as we talk about this.
So it's a perfect example, I think, of adaptive reuse. The building now has a couple new restaurants, more retail, it has a fitness center, and I think it's actually adding more to the community than what Macy's by itself was doing. So I think it's a great example to think about as we look at other opportunities. And everyone will tell you this is not Hawaiian architecture, but no one will tell you what it is. So what I think it is when you start thinking about a number of design principles that you apply as you're designing. And the more successful you are with each one of those principles, the stronger that the feeling that the building belongs here is. All the cultural references are very, very subtle. It's not themed. You never feel like you're in Disney, right? What you feel is like there is something there that feels right.
I think material culture is critical for the survival of living culture as well. And so by material culture, I mean the things that we build and the things that we use and the things that we wear and the things that we enjoy. So sometimes they live in museums and we can appreciate them by going and saying, look, these people of our past made this thing and used this thing, and we can learn from that and we can be inspired by that. Sometimes it's adapting those things into a contemporary use, a contemporary need. They are representative of their time and place and the people who built them, but they can still be relevant for us today, and sometimes that takes adaptation. So yes, I think it's incredibly important for us to have that touchstone of the past and to make them relevant for us today. And part of that relevancy is to understand them. None of us kind of sprang whole from the forehead of a god. You know, we are the sum of the parts of our ancestors.
If I understood it correctly, what I would just add is I think art is really just an expression of who we are now.
And I think the material culture reflects that.
I love driving through Cacaco, and what was, one mural now is like the whole Cacaco, and it's like, wow, very soon everyone in the world is going to know this place if we keep doing that, right? It's something that is more interactive, that is reflective of who we are today. I think there is something to be said about creating contrast. Sometimes, if you have too much of the same, if it's a beautiful thing, you get numb. And sometimes, to put something on the spotlight, you need to create that kind of contrast. And I think that has been proven many times, and that's a perfect example. The Louvre, to me, is the fact that the new is so new compared to the old. It's not trying to replicate or imitate it. It's just standing next to each other. And I think you appreciate them just by contrast.
It shouldn't pretend to be something it isn't. It shouldn't have a false sense of history. So when you're talking about an addition in a historic district or an addition to a historic building, I think what you're really looking for is harmony. You're looking for compatibility, but you're not looking to fake history.
I mean, a lot of the music that I'm interested from Hawaii existed 40 years ago, and each year it's gonna be 50 years, it's gonna be 60 years, and so what I've decided to do with the releases that I put out is press them onto vinyl so that in 40 years' time, somebody else has the chance to discover that same music. But I think it's important to have generations inform each other, and if not inform, at least be aware of what each other is doing, because I think it's easy to get lost in what your work is all about.
I actually never use the old vintage kimono or obi as is into any of my clothing, so I do not have anyone just wearing the kimono as is. There are types of kimono and obi that I consider museum or display quality, which I will not touch, and these are beautiful antique pieces.
It depends on the person, people are going to have different levels of passion or obsession with preserving things, but once it's gone, and it's going to be even more difficult to bring it back. And if we can do what we can now to at least understand these things from our past, it'll be easier for us to present it to the future.
I don't think that what makes the building important is just the age. It's also relevant, the kind of architecture. But I mean, it's definitely something that should be rebuilt again. And it may not be built the same way it was, like many of the historic buildings throughout the world, but every time we do it, you leave the scars that talk about who we are and how we got here. And if you erase all those things, then you are not you anymore, right? So
some of the intangible heritage, what are some of the things that animate those places, whether it's cultural practices or gathering or things like music and food and language, that places don't exist in isolation. So when I say broadly, we remain committed to saving the places that tell Hawaii's stories, but also embracing the people that animate those places and their lived experience. So all of that kind of comes together and makes, I think, a very rich tapestry.
On the other hand, when you work with existing structures, you differentiate yourself from everybody else. These days, when you put a new building together in our industry, in the commercial real estate industry, cost is such a driver that you have a tendency to build the same building over and over. And if you take a building down and you start from scratch, most likely you're going to end up with an IFES building and a couple of retailers. It's hard to compete with everybody else when you have the same product. So to the extent that you can find a formula that allows you to incorporate some of what is there, you separate yourself from everyone else.
Site planning become as important as technology, so we were really excited to see those guidelines and some of the technical analysis of how you look at a place and looking at things like fixing broken windows might be as effective as, you know, installing an entirely new air conditioning system. Prevention is better than cure, so can we stop or slow global warming? And then eventually I think we have to look at adaptability and modification, and what does that look like? So I think heritage and culture has to be part of that conversation. It can't just be about hardening the shoreline, for example.
I always try to think of grounding the project, which is why I go back to what I said before about building even something as large as La Mona Center, you know, 800,000 square feet of new construction. How do you ground a project? And that's both in terms of architecture and merchandising. Change is not going to stop, right? It's only natural, it's happening everywhere, in everybody's lives, in everybody's cities all the time. So it's not a matter of, is it gonna occur, can you stop? It's a matter of how do you manage it, right? Right, and I think we all share that responsibility, whether you're doing, you know, fashion or music or preservation or new development. It's up to all of us as citizens of Honolulu to do our little part.
I have a lot of Japanese nationals that are just amazed at what I do. And they're like, you know, they're, I think, flattered that I find it such a choice for me to work with this fabric from their culture.